Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to be talking about Sucrose in a somewhat updated Sucrose guide. We're going to be covering everything you need to know about Sucrose, with my main focus being on why you should save your resources, because Sucrose is an amazing character who doesn't need a lot of investment to be good. There's so many characters in this game that require good artifacts, good talent levels, a strong weapon for them to be useful, whereas Sucrose with basically level 1 everything or very minimal investment can be extremely powerful. I'm going to go into more detail in the video, so I want to start right away. First of all, I want you guys to know that I stream almost every night on Twitch. Link in the description if you're interested. Be sure to sub if you're new, and that being said, let's get right into the video. So in this video, I want to cover everything you need to know about Sucrose and why she's such a strong unit even with very low investment. Even with low level talents, you can effectively have a very powerful 4-star support who's basically optimal without having to waste your resources on her, being able to reinvest them into other units. I don't want people to think that this video is saying never invest in Sucrose. That's not the point. It's that you can get a lot of value without investing into her, and so you can determine which one's the best for you depending on how you want to play your Sucrose and what you want to get, what you want to achieve from her. Sucrose is a great unit for many reasons. She's very versatile and she's an Anemo unit, which means she can clump enemies and run the Viridescent Veneer set, which is a set we'll talk more about in the artifact section, but basically it reduces the resistance of enemies and is very strong for buffing your team's damage. On top of that, one of the main reasons to run Sucrose is because of her two passives. These will both give your party elemental mastery. Your first one buffs characters in your party with the matching element to a swirl by 50. So this one gives 50 elemental mastery. And your second talent, which you unlock past level 60, like when you ascend to 60 out of 70, gives your team 20% of your elemental mastery of Sucrose's EM. So because of that, Sucrose is very strong because she gives a ton of EM just off the bat off her talents and has access to the Viridescent Veneer set, and on top of that can run Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, which is a great weapon giving you 48% attack. There are other weapon options too, but we'll get into that later in the video. But basically the point is, see, I'm running a level 1 weapon, and sure, my artifacts are leveled, but see, like they're plus 16, my flowers plus 0. My artifacts do have some investment, and I am running elemental mastery on them. But other than that, you don't really need to invest in her. What I mean is you can get her level 60 out of 70, leave her there, not have to level her talents because these barely increase your damage, right? Like this scaling, it might look kind of high, but like it really doesn't do that much damage. You use Sucrose's E to swirl enemies, to proc Viridescent Veneer, to proc your passives. But apart from that, you don't really use her E for the damage itself. And so usually Sucrose can be optimal even if she doesn't deal a ton of damage, because either way she's going to buff your whole team. So spending a ton of resources in her to make her stronger usually isn't worth it unless you have a ton of resources to spare or you just want your Sucrose to deal damage, which is fine. But it isn't necessary, and that's the point of this video. Also, while you might need some EM for this passive to be good, it's really a lot easier to get good elemental mastery or to build Sucrose than other characters because Sucrose doesn't really need substats. If you're running her as an EM bot, where she does, again, she's not building for her own damage, her substats don't really matter. Like, sure, energy recharge can be nice, but realistically, all you want is elemental mastery on the main stats, and you can have no substats and it doesn't really matter, which will save you a lot of resin and effort in the long run. Now, keep in mind, and I want to clarify, if you love Sucrose, if you want to level her, if you want her to deal damage, you can, and I will cover that in this video. I just first of all want to say that especially if you're limited on resources, like you don't need to invest in her, you don't need to level her talents for her to be good. She's one of the very few supports in this game where you don't need to invest for her to reach like almost max potential. The last thing I want to specify is that the situation when you can want to level her is, again, if you want her to be dealing damage. Since Swirl is a transformative reaction, it actually scales not only on elemental mastery, but also quite significantly on your level. So if you want your Sucrose's swirls to do a lot of damage, if you want to invest into her, yes, it'll be much more expensive and it's not usually what I recommend. But if that is something you want to do, be sure to level her up because it does buff your swirl damage. And so I will be covering both builds, both playstyles of Sucrose, everything you need to know about them in this video. So I kind of went over her talents in the previous section, but basically, as I mentioned, you're using her for these two passives. So you want to make sure to get her 60 out of 70, ascend her past 60 so that she unlocks the second one and you can use her efficiently. I don't recommend leveling her talents, but if you do want to level them, you can max your burst because it's usually what you're going to be spamming. But again, you're usually using it to like clump enemies and infuse it rather than dealing damage with your Sucrose. If you don't know what her abilities do, her E does a little swirl in front of her, somewhat grouping enemies and basically swirling. And your burst also is this giant projectile that constantly swirls, and you can infuse it with an element, and then it'll swirl with that element, deal elemental damage of that type, and you'll proc the Viridescent Veneer set if you're running it. Now let's talk about Sucrose's artifacts, and we're going to start with the artifact sets and then talk about the specific stats you want. For artifact sets, you really want to get the Viridescent Veneer set as early as possible. And I really mean as early as possible, even if it's just a 4-star set at like AR 40, you really just want to get this effect to buff your team's damage. If you don't know what Viridescent Venerer does, not only will it give you a Nemo damage bonus and increase your swirl's damage, but it will mainly decrease the elemental resistance of opponents by 40% of whatever element you swirl. So if you're running a Pyro comp, a Hydro comp, if your main carry is an elemental DPS, right? So Diluc, Shangling, any of those elemental carries, you can greatly increase their damage by swirling whatever element they are. And keep in mind that while you can't swirl like Geo or Anemo, so this, you can't reduce the resistance of those two elements with this set, even if you are running a DPS, you know, like Shao or like a Geo DPS, you can still run Viridescent on Sucrose, not only because the set will buff your Sucrose's damage, but mainly because you could just swirl another element of a good support you have. So for example, even if your main carry isn't elemental, if you're running official support or a Xingqiu support, swirling that element to buff that support can actually oftentimes be worth it. And I don't want my explanation to be confusing, but basically whatever you swirl, whatever element you swirl, that element will deal a lot more damage to them. I do, however, want to point out that this set can sometimes be difficult to proc. For example, in a Diluc team, it's very easy on your first rotation, but if you're running Diluc or Xingqiu, sometimes you might not be able to swirl Pyro and only Hydro, which can make the set a bit worse or require a bit more setup. However, I do believe that even if you're swirling like your support's element, it's still some decent value, but always try to swirl the right element to get the max value from your Sucrose. But I don't think I need to explain this anymore. It's just a very good set. You guys know this by now. So I always recommend running it on Sucrose. Even if your Sucrose wants to deal damage or doesn't need to reduce resistances, it's still the way to go because of the 60% swirl damage increase and a Nemo bonus. In terms of the specific artifact stats you want though, let me break it down for you guys so you understand what's the best Sucrose for you. Overall, generally speaking, when you're running Sucrose in a team, and when I like her a lot more than Venti, is in teams that need the elemental mastery, that want to get buffed. So for example, a Shangling team whose Pyronado will snapshot and carry over the buffs, dealing a lot of damage, she really wants Sucrose because of not only Viridescent Venerer, but also Thrilling Tales and the really good passive. And in order to make these passives work, you ideally want Elemental Mastery on your artifacts. For your main stats on all your pieces, I would say there are two main builds for Sucrose, so I'll break down both of them. For a general Sucrose, I recommend Elemental Mastery on everything, Elemental Mastery Sands, Goblet, and Circlet. However, your sands can also be energy recharge if you want to be spamming your burst, and especially in certain comps that don't need the EM but that still want Sucrose, for example a Shao team. And so if you do want your Sucrose to deal more damage and spam her burst, I would recommend an energy recharge sands with an Anemo damage bonus goblet, and you can run a crit, rate, or damage on the circlet to maximize her damage. However, overall, and what I run in most comps, is just Elemental Mastery as a main stat on everything. And do keep in mind that this build is a lot cheaper because your substats aren't important. Having an Elemental Mastery main stat means you can't get EM on the substat, so you're not really like grinding to get those perfect substats as much. Now we're going to talk about Sucrose's weapons. One of the main reasons why I made this video, and I think this is a very, very misunderstood character weapon-wise. Almost everyone I see talking about Sucrose recommends an Elemental Mastery weapon, like the Mapamare or the Sacrificial Fragments. I want to bring more nuance and say that there's situations for both of these weapons, like there's situations for the Sacrificial Fragments where it can be the best weapon for you, and we'll cover that, but there are also many situations where Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers is the best, and I believe that this weapon is insanely powerful and very underrated. So overall for Sucrose, I recommend either running her on Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers to buff your team, to buff whoever your carry is by 48% attack, and this can be especially strong if they snapshot. For example, Shangling's Pyronado, you use Thrilling Tales, swap into them, press Q, and then her whole burst will be buffed. Or with hyper carries like Shao, giving this attack percent to your hyper carry lets them deal way more damage the whole time they're on the field, and it's usually what I recommend for Sucrose in those teams. And I know you guys might be thinking that this weapon like isn't overrated because a lot of people have talked about it, but I think people undervalue just how good this is, and I think that it's so good that it's sometimes worth running Sucrose over Venti. However, something like Sacrificial Fragments is also amazing for her because it gives you a high Elemental Mastery stat and resets your elemental skill cooldown. And the chance that this does get higher with the refinement, but basically you can spam your elemental skill, get more particles from it, right? Because you can use it twice or 3 times with your Constellations. And on top of that, if you're investing into Sucrose, it can deal a bit of damage, but that's usually not the main focus. So because of that, I think her two best weapons are the Sacrificial Fragments and the Thrilling Tales. This one will give you much more EM, whereas this one gives you more attack percent. From a strictly like team damage point of view, Thrilling Tales is usually more damage, despite this one giving you some elemental mastery. And so Sacrificial Fragments, if you want the elemental mastery, and if you need the particles, right? Like if your Shao doesn't have enough ER, you can run Sucrose on Sac Frags, and it can help you a lot. However, the buff from Thrilling Tales is nothing to scoff at, and it does have a 50% uptime with a 48% attack buff, so I think both of these weapons are really good. I personally usually use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, but if you're investing in your Sucrose, you can also run a Sac Frag. Lastly, if you don't want to run Thrilling Tales and you want your Sucrose to get that EM, you can run Mapamare as a free-to-play option. Lastly, something to keep in mind is that for Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, as you guys can see, I have a lot of them and you don't need to level this at all. So again, it can save you on a lot of resources if you do use this weapon. Regarding Skyward Atlas on Sucrose, it can buff your damage, but that's usually not the point of Sucrose, so run it if you want to. It's mainly a meme, but overall, I like Sack Frags and Thrilling Tales for Sucrose. For her Constellations, they're not that needed. However, I do want to say her Constellation 1 is very good, and in my opinion, the main one you should go for if you want to. If you don't know, her C1 gives you another charge, letting you basically get twice as many particles from your E, and obviously use it one more time. Having an extra charge on a support character is great because you're spending most of your time off the field, so anytime you swap into this character, she should have both her charges ready. Her C2 increases the duration of your burst, which is nice. 3 and 5 are a bit more damage, 4 is somewhat useless, and her Constellation 6 is actually pretty good if you get it. It increases the elemental damage bonus of your party members by whatever you infuse your burst into. So if you use Sucrose's burst and then you Diluc ult into it, you will gain that pyro damage bonus, which can be very nice. Overall though, I tend to aim for Sucrose C1 if you can get it. Apart from that, it's not that big of a deal. Now let's talk about Sucrose's team comps. There's actually a bit more depth to this than you might think, and Sucrose in general fits most comps. She's a good Anemo support, has a lot of utility, can run a good artifact set, a good weapon, good talents, just very good overall. However, there are some comps where she shines exceptionally well and some comps where she's actually needed to make the comp work or to make it as good as possible. And so we're going to talk about all that in this section so you know in which team to place your Sucrose. First of all, since she acts like a powerful Anemo battery generating a lot of Anemo particles, you can run her in a Shao team and she can be very strong there. Other than that, since she does give you a lot of elemental mastery and the Viridescent Venerer set, in reaction comps, so comps that are vaporizing like a Xiangling team, a Diluc team, or just any characters spamming reactions where you can reliably proc the Viridescent Venerer set, can be very nice for Sucrose. The best example is this comp, Child Xiangling. In this team, Child's going to be your on-field DPS, while Xiangling is vaporizing everything. And so to set this rotation up, you're usually going to start with Sucrose, swirl the Pyro, and then have your Pyronado kill everything on Xiangling. And so as you can see in this clip, the huge damage being dealt by Xiangling is amplified significantly by Sucrose, by the Thrilling Tales, the passive giving Elemental Mastery, and the Viridescent Venerer shredding resistances. So in a comp like this, Sucrose is essential and almost irreplaceable, except maybe with like Zhongli. So apart from just reaction teams and sort of hyper carries that can use her buffs, I would just recommend running her in whatever team needs an Anemo clumper. So let's say there's a lot of enemies, you want to group them all up, you can use Sucrose's burst for that, and she can be very good. And overall, she's very flexible and fits just about every single comp. So I hope this video was informative, and overall what I'm trying to say is you don't need to spend resources on your Sucrose because she's super strong even with low investment because of her talents, artifact set, and weapon that you can run on her. However, as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't mean you can't invest into her. I know a lot of people want to, which is why I'm sort of scared of saying this. Basically, if you want her swirl to deal damage, as I said, you can invest into her, but generally speaking, you don't have to, and that's the beauty of it. A character where you don't actually need to invest for her to be like top tier and very, very useful is great, and it means you can just run your Sucrose on low investment and get a lot of value in return. Overall, Sucrose is an amazing unit, very good at everything she does, and I really like her. One of the strongest 4-stars you can run as a support. So I hope this video was helpful. If it did help you out, be sure to let me know. If you have any questions, I read most comments, all that stuff. And I feel like I should let you guys know that literally over 75% of my viewers aren't subbed. And I hate asking for subs, but if you appreciate the content, it would mean a lot. But anyways, I don't want to waste your time, so that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. So feel free to sub if you want to. Follow me on Twitch, all that stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.